Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. By the way, you might consider we have a new website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray, and it's at peterjray.com. You might consider, quote unquote, checking it out. Uh, Today's topic is John S. Ray's Oberlin College Diary, 1945, Part 15. This is the second half of Zook Family Memories Collection, or ZFMC number 35. Now, after the summer of 1945, in which my father had been a fisherman, worked as a fisherman in Ketchikan, Alaska, he was on his way home from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, to Sandusky, Ohio. September 18th, 1945. This morning we got up at 7:30 after about 4 hours sleep. Vancouver is a war city of 600,000. And just about like any big town in the United States. We had a very slow and sleepy train ride down to Seattle. We tied up our packages and expressed them home. At the outskirts of Seattle, we left Bruce Partridge and started for Los Angeles. After a very chilly ride on the back of a truck, we made it into Chehalis, or sacking out in an auto court. I might say that we passed by the Olympia Brewery this afternoon, the source of many big evenings. September 19th, 1945. Without a watch, Wayne Duff and I managed to sleep 12 hours last night, and we hit the road about noon. We poodle-duddled about 2 hours getting through Portland. At the southern edge of town, we got a nice view of a big pulp mill in action. The rivers are crowded with logs now. In Salem, Oregon, we saw the beautiful Capitol. It is a modern, functional building of white marble. On top of its white dome is a large golden statue of a woodsman. Surprising piece of architecture to find out here. It got dark and we weren't able to leave Salem. After nearly giving up, we finally got a room through one of the local bartenders. September 20th. We hit the road this morning about 7:30. I might say that we started our hitchhiking just across from the Six Brewery. There seemed to be quite a few soldiers on the road who were about to be discharged. Also wives who are driving to meet their discharged husbands. We drove through the Willamette Valley, which is noted for its crops of hops and flax. This morning we managed to keep from getting wet, and this afternoon we ran into our first summer weather. Some of the leaves are already turning yellow out here. The evergreen-covered mountains are quite a beautiful, pleasing sight along the road. We have reined up here 20 miles from the Oregon Caves, which we are planning to take in tomorrow. Our cabin is a very nice one with knotted pine walls, heater, shower, etc., and only $1.25 per day. September 21. Today was really a killer diller. Everything happened. We finally made it out to the Oregon Caves, which are not particularly spectacular. Wayne Duff and I were the tail light of the procession through the caverns. Carlsbad should be much better. Then the fireworks began. We got a lift with a good-humored old guy going into Eureka. First thing, he blew a front tire. We changed it and blew it before going 20 feet. Then the old fellow bought another tire from a guy driving by. After borrowing a bad tire pump, we finally got the third tire on. All this time it was pouring down rain. In the meantime, the old guy who had been rolled jumped out of the rumble seat and took off in a bread truck. About this time, the car developed a shimmy, so we tried to have it fixed. Then the shimmy got much worse. We went on anyhow, and it got much better. The redwoods are beautiful. Now we're settled in a warm little barn in Klamath, ready for the sack. Ho-hum. September 22. Our man Barney Oldfield snored like a bass fiddle last night. I got rather desperate, and at one time even adjourned to the John to try to sleep. However, it was all to no avail. We hit the road about 6 this morning in the rain and fog. The ride down the coast was sensational. The road was on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was quite a sight to watch the waves wash over the rocks exposed by the low tide. The old flivver held together until we made it into Eureka. A few miles the other side of Eureka, we picked up a lift into San Francisco with a Coast Guard CPO. The weather was bright and sunny all the way. Then we went through quite a few more redwoods. We had a beautiful sunset shot of the Golden Gate Bridge with an outbound steamer passing beneath it. We caught a bus over the 5-mile Bay Bridge, which gave us a beautiful early evening view of the boats in the San Francisco Bay, literally hundreds of them. Then our troubles started again. We could find no place to stay. After a few short rides and a long walk, we are curled up here in a cold convertible coupe for the night. I hope the socks on our hands and t-shirts on our heads keep off the mosquitoes. September 23. Our feet turned to ice blocks last night, but I think we got a little sleep anyhow. We switched over to the more heavily traveled valley route this morning. The San Joaquin Valley is really hot and seems to grow everything: cotton, figs, grapes, tomatoes, walnuts, etc. We caught a ride with a soldier and his mother into Los Angeles. However, she seemed to politely resent our not being in the service, so we voluntarily left them in Tulare. After some fairly long waits, we finally caught a ride into Los Angeles. We had nearly given up for this evening, but our luck held. A wide, very well-traveled superhighway runs through the San Fernando Valley into L.A. Quite an experience to drive over it at night. We came on out to the Cooks and found them running a hotel service as usual. 2 women Marines had just left, and an Army lieutenant and a Marine sergeant were still here. Bruce Partridge caught a long ride down the coast and made it in yesterday after having visited his brother. The Cook domicile is certainly just the place to rest for a day or so. They really make you feel at home. September 24. We all slept late this morning and fixed our own breakfasts. Bruce Partridge, Wayne Duff, Sam, the Army lieutenant, and I did our laundry in the washing machine. The Chamber of Commerce weather dried the clothes in a hurry. Sam, Duff, and I made a trip downtown to get our shoes repaired and pants pressed, also to grab a few beers. We stopped off and saw Duffer's cousin George. I can't say that I was favorably impressed. This evening we had a delicious buffet luncheon and some cold beer afterwards. Always plenty of good food and cold beer at the Cooks. We played some games with the assorted Cooks and are ready for another long sack watch. We're going to stay over tomorrow. September 25th. We slept late again and fixed our own breakfasts. Spent about 4 hours this afternoon out in the sunshine, catching up on my writing. This sun out here is really great. I might say that we had a very strong martini before dinner. After dinner, Duffer and I beat Bruce and Paula in a rugged rubber of Pitaka. It's a pretty decent game. Bruce had a date with the girl he met in the bank this morning. Wayne Duff and I took Paula to see the movie Rhapsody in Blue. George Gershwin certainly had quite a life. The music was inspiring. We stopped at a beer joint afterwards. September 26. After thanking the Cooks and catching several buses, we finally hit the road outside Pasadena about noon. The road over to San Bernardino is lined with vineyards and wineries. We very luckily caught a long ride from San Bernardino clear into Flagstaff. All 3 of us at once, too. Had 3 flats on the way, but made good time. We traded off on the driving and got into Flagstaff about 3:30 a.m. The desert country is left behind as you approach Flagstaff. It gets cooler and the sagebrush gives way in favor of pines. The altitude is about 7,000 feet and the temperature 38 degrees early this morning. The sheriff said there wasn't enough room for us to sleep in the jail. Luckily, we found a vacant hotel lobby and some couches. Ho-hum. September 27. We rolled off the couches after only 3 hours sleep. I was really beat. After a fairly long wait, we finally made it out to the Grand Canyon and had an extremely interesting discussion on faith with the folks that brought us into the canyon. The first sight of the Grand Canyon leaves a person breathless. What an enormous gash in the earth! It's almost beyond description. The colors in it seem to be constantly changing. We finally settled down and found a room. I had a short snooze and then heard a very interesting illustrated lecture on the early exploration of the canyon. Nearly an impossible task. September 28. We got up this morning in time to see the sun breaking over the canyon. Quite a sight. Then Duff and Bruce took off for Denver. After shaving, writing, and eating, I hit the road about 11 o'clock and got a lift into Glendale with a carefree young couple that is touring the country. Very pleasant to ride with them. He almost got a ticket this afternoon. Close but no cigar. We are getting into the country of the giant cacti now, like you see in the movies. Very picturesque. I found a $1.25 hotel room. Very fortunate. September 29. Hit the road at 7:30 this morning and had pretty good luck all day. Did some driving for an old codger down through Tucson, Arizona, and passed through many more of the giant barrel cacti. The weather is still cool. Had a fairly long ride with an Army lieutenant who was just discharged this morning. He had been in the Army for 4 years and had 148 points. Excuse me. He has been around the world, saved a lot of money, and has his wife, his old job, and a new daughter waiting for him in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Needless to say, he was in fine spirits. A fine guy. It's only about 6 o'clock, but I've reined up here in Deming to make sure I get a room. September 30th. Got on the road fairly early and caught a ride into El Paso with a young shavetail, then walked over the Rio Grande into Juarez, Mexico. It's quite dirty but very picturesque. I couldn't remember a damn bit of my Spanish, only German. Had a good time nosing around anyhow. The customs officer really gave my bag the once over. El Paso seems to be very sprawly and mostly Mexican. After getting a lot of messed up directions, I finally made it out to the edge of town, then rode into White City here with a happy-go-lucky traveling salesman, or peddler as he liked to call himself. He was quite a guy and was at his best when complaining about the food. I helped him patch up a fan belt with some of my Band-Aids and string out in the desert this afternoon. Also went on a little water-carrying expedition for the radiator. He had lost part of his abdominal wall in a mine explosion on New Guinea and couldn't lift anything. For these small favors, he took me into Carlsbad and bought me my dinner, then brought me out here again. He really gave a big boot to the afternoon's jaunt through the wide-open spaces. I'm settled in a cool little cell just 7 miles from the caverns. I understand there is snow in Denver, Colorado, and hope the lads aren't too cold. October 1. First off this morning I went out to the caverns. The limestone formations were spectacular, especially in the King's Chamber. A very worthwhile little expedition. Of course, the caverns don't compare with the Grand Canyon. Had a fairly long ride this evening with a first lieutenant, his wife, and child. Very interesting people. But I left my map in their car. I also got stuck for a $3 cabin. When it rains, it pours, I guess. October 2. This has been one large day. It has been raining in the last few days, and the hitchhiking was rather sloppy this morning. Very fortunately, I talked the Auto Club in Oberlin out of another road map, so I'm all set again. Slipped off my route this afternoon and lost an hour or so in Breckenridge. Some of the towns in Texas aren't too bad, but most of them are pretty well covered with red dust. Best thing about the state is the sunset in the early evening. Had a very lucky ride through to the eastern edge of Dallas. Met a soldier there, and we went on together. Got a long, fast lift into Shreveport in a big LaSalle. After several shots of whiskey, the driver got pretty sleepy. I barreled her on into Shreveport, Louisiana. The soldier and I are shacking up for the night here in a hotel. What a ride. Luckily, we got here in one piece. October 3. The countryside hereabouts almost looks like home in comparison with that of Texas. Logging is carried on a much smaller scale than in the Northwest. When I got out to Monroe, found that Harold Freilich is home on furlough. Very fortunate. Met some of his friends and got all the information. Selman Field is like a big playhouse now. A letter from Mother says that I should be home by October 10 if I want to see Harold and Tommy Zook. I'm going to try to make it and still go by way of Omaha, Nebraska. I bummed a meal and hit the road again, and I'm sacking out early to get set for the big push. October 4. Made out all right today on the mileage. Arkansas looks like a mighty sorry state, as they say down here. Quite a bit of cotton grows in through here. Believe it or not, we passed through Dixie this morning. Right in the heart of the cotton country, too. The houses the darkies live in are nothing more than big pig pens. They have a pretty tough time of it. The weather was cool, damp, and very unpleasant all day. Rode for a while this evening with a woman going through to Columbus, Ohio. However, I'm still going to go through Omaha. I located a room for $1. Very fortunate. October 5. Had a little difficulty getting started this morning. I overslept and then rode in the back of 2 cattle trucks, one of which had cattle in it. Good experience, I always say. Then I got a lift into Kansas City with a trucker. The countryside is starting to look much more civilized, but the weather is still bad. One fellow wouldn't pick me up this evening when I told him I wasn't in the service. Nothing much I could say. Then I came into Maryville this evening with some high school kids going to a football game. They were a pretty good bunch and asked me to go out to the game with them, which I did for a while. October 6. I arose bright and early this morning and made it over to Council Bluffs by noon. First thing I did was to get a shoe shine and call the Haywards. Then I fell asleep on the trolley going out and got off 12 blocks too soon. It is really fine to see the Haywards again. Everyone is looking in the pink. Marty's brother is discharged now, and there's no word from the lads. I wonder where they are. Marty Hayward and I took a long walk in the woods before supper. We had a perfectly enormous steak for supper. Mr. Hayward gave us the car for the evening. We found a little beer joint and managed to locate a dance. Afterwards, we found a quiet little spot out in the country. I think Marty is going to be another Duffy. Got in about 3:30 a.m. October 7th, 1945. Got up rather sleepily this morning at 9:30. We had a big breakfast, and Mrs. Hayward fixed a big box lunch for me. They have certainly treated me royally here in Omaha, Nebraska. They even brought me out to the eastern edge of Council Bluffs about noon. Good people. The rides came along nicely, and 34 miles this side of Des Moines, Iowa, I caught a lift clear into Sandusky, Ohio. It was with a discharged Army lieutenant, and we traded off on the driving. We pulled into Sandusky just 22 hours after leaving Omaha. It's great to be home again. I hereby pronounce the summer's jaunt a success. I covered 10,315 miles, 8,815 of which were hitchhiked. To be continued. Now we have 2 comments. The first is by John S. Ray, the author himself. Quote, ZFMC 35 read and very much enjoyed. The trip to Alaska was a wonderful one and with good friends. I remember many of the good times and the spectacular scenery. I'd really forgotten how hard we worked. Very pleasant to recall such nice memories. John S. Ray, Rocky River, Ohio. And the next comment is from Ruth S. Ray, my mother and John S. Ray's wife. Quote, Great, just great. Your edition of John's diary of his trip to Alaska was very good. I especially enjoyed his spiritual expressions. Ann Duff said she was sending copies of the pages where John referred to Wayne's aunt, Mrs. Beck, to them in Alaska. Lenore phoned and said she had received the latest one, and Mother also had just read hers. Thank you for this service to our families. Unique and valuable. Ruth S. Ray, Rocky River, Ohio. Well, that concludes today's presentation, John S. Ray's 1945 Oberlin Diary, Part 15. Good luck to you with your own family history efforts if this interests you in finding, preserving, and sharing old letters, diaries, and photographs, and interviewing elderly relatives while they're alive. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.